So thanks everybody for coming. This is the 65th HR Network breakfast seminar, or as some of you are now calling it, the TFC Talks. And today we're going to do a deep dive into the world of assessments, specifically how assessments help you to meet your business goals. And our focus will be on three areas: hiring, talent development, as well as change management. The program is fantastic, and we have three awesome panelists. So let's keep moving forward. Okay, so I'm Darren Kimball, and I'm your host today. So I just want to thank our nearly 500 corporate clients who have put their trust in us, particularly those that are seated in the audience. And for those of you that are not yet customers, we would love to have the opportunity to add you to the list. So one final note of housekeeping before we kick off our panel. You guys are always great about giving us feedback, so please look for the email survey that we'll send out later today, and it means a lot to us, so please click through and give us your feedback. Also, mark your calendars for June 19th. That's our next breakfast seminar, and the topic then will be perspectives from senior HR executives who have a legal background. So we're going to do some really interesting things with that. So now I have the pleasure of introducing our moderator. Robin Sledder is a certified 5 O'Clock Club career coach. She's also a Columbia-trained executive coach, and she's a huge New York Rangers fan. Robin, come on up.
Hi, everyone. So, Darren, thank you for that, the questions, because I'm so excited to see, not necessarily excited to see that you're not using assessments, but that you're in a great place today because you haven't been using them. And we're about to hear how incredibly important they are through the whole life cycle of our employees. And when it's attached to business outcomes, what an impact it can have on the individual and the bottom line of the business. I can't tell you how excited I've been to be associated with these three people. Again, because this is a new topic for a lot of you, you're about to hear from the best in the business. These guys, it's a combination of someone that's leading this and using assessments in an organization of just a couple of hundred people to somebody that's using it for thousands of people and somewhere in the middle. So I'm not going to spend any more time because these people are phenomenal. Darren did tell you about tweeting your questions as it comes up as you're hearing, but also think about questions that you came into the room with. So you'll have questions that you want to, as a result of what you're hearing, but maybe questions that you came with that you want to get the expert's opinion on. So the first person is Carla Villar, and Carla is the VP of Human Resources for Human Resources Worldwide at Orion Holdings, which is a division of the Interpublic Group. So Carla, you're on.
Thank you.
Oh, you're going to stay there.
I'm going to stay here. Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. Luckily, it's not snowing and only raining, so I'll take the rain from other than the snow. So we're going to get started. How do my presentation? Oh, okay. So I don't have a presentation. That's fine. Luckily, we've been working with these assessments for a number of years, so we can just talk through it. I just swing it. So, as Robin said, I'm with Orion Holdings, which is a division of IPG Media Brands, and we are a global media solutions company. We have a pretty unique, we're known for our unique business model, which is media barter, and due to that unique business model, we have very difficult positions, very unique positions, and they're difficult to fill. So when I arrived to Orion, one of the things that I realized quickly was that we had a high turnover rate, and we had a hard time having the stakeholders, the hiring managers, identify the right criteria for the roles that we were filling. And so I needed a tool that could ultimately get everybody on the same page, but also identify the right behaviors for the role and identify the right candidates. The purpose of that was, again, to reduce our attrition rates. So I had a friend who once told me she filled out a questionnaire and got the job. No interview, just got the job. And she was in a sales position. And at the core of most of our roles, we require a sales acumen. So I called her up and I asked her to give me information about this questionnaire that she took, and she gave me the name of an assessment tool called Predictive Index, also known as PI. And I called up the rep, and we spoke for probably about 10 minutes, and immediately I liked what I heard. It was a global assessment tool, which means it came in 70 languages, including Braille. It was easy and quick. There were 2 questions, and the results were immediate. You received the results immediately. And it was broadly applicable, meaning that it was for any role, any company, any organization, any industry. And I needed something quick. So this was, it felt right. I researched other assessments. This one seemed to fit our business model the best. So I said, can I try it out? And he sent me a survey. The rep sent me a survey. I took it, and the next day we scheduled a call for me to receive my analysis. And I always compare it to going to a psychic, except I didn't spend the $50, so that was really good. The individual on the other end of the phone knew me so well and had never met me. He knew how I would react to a conflict. He knew what motivated me, what demotivated me, and it was eerily accurate. And I knew at that instant that I needed to get this tool in-house, but I had to convince my management team to take it on. So then I asked for 3 more surveys. And my thought process was, I had the CEO, who has a sales background, take the survey. I had our media director, who has a client management background, take the survey. And I had the receptionist take the survey. I put together the 3 analysis. I stripped their names from the reports, and I put it in front of my CEO, and I said, guess who's who? And within 2 minutes of reading the first analysis, he says to me, we need this tool. How quickly can we implement this? And can we have every employee take it? So being that we're part of a collection of media agencies and we have almost 800 employees, at first I was like, no, let's pilot it with a small audience, with a small brand, and so we did. And what I learned, here we go. What I learned about the PI, I went in looking for a tool to help with recruiting and with finding the right employees. What I ended up finding was a tool that really can live through the life cycle of an employee. So from talent acquisition to talent management to change management and even growth strategies. And the growth strategies come in where we can coach our sales teams, we can improve efficiency and productivity within the teams, because ultimately what we're doing is we're pulling people together based on their primary factors. So how does PI work? I'm going to talk about it from a talent acquisition perspective, because I think that's ultimately what we use it for the most. what ends up happening is candidates or people, employees, will fill out the survey. It's 2 questions, series of adjectives. What the system does, the tool does, is it takes that information and it, based on the primary factors of a person's behavior, and it creates a pattern. And that pattern is what ultimately defines your primary behaviors, your motivators, your demotivators, and it tells you, it ultimately gives you insight into your judgment, your maturity, your beliefs, and your ability to make decisions. When you look at recruiting or hiring and the hiring process, there are 3 levels. Most hiring managers make decisions on the first 2. First one being first impression, second one being what the resume says. Credentials, experience, knowledge, skill set. What often doesn't happen is we don't dig deeper into the 3rd level, which is what I just mentioned, the judgment, the decision making. However, when hiring managers go to fire an employee, they're usually firing because of level 3, which is the beliefs, the judgments, the maturity, and the decision making. So if we can get it right in the beginning, chances are you'll have the right employee in the right role, and ultimately your attrition rates will go down. So we start off with having our hiring managers fill out a PRO. A PRO is a series of questions based on behaviors for the individual, for the role. Once we have a pattern established for the PRO, which is the job description, the job role, we then start our recruiting process. And with every candidate that comes through the door, they fill out a PI. We match the patterns. Obviously, if they match, ultimately it's a good fit. That does not mean that it's used as a standalone tool in the process. We still encourage, and we still do, interview every single candidate, and it's part of the process. If the patterns don't match, the tool gives us an opportunity to look into the gap analysis. It gives us a gap analysis of what are the primary behaviors of the role and where is this candidate lacking, or where do they not meet those primary factors. And then what it does is it allows us to create and develop and use behavioral interview questions to dig a little bit deeper and find out a little bit more. So for us, it's been incredibly useful, not only in the recruiting process, but also once the employee is in-house and they're going through their employee cycle. We use it for coaching. We coach and we play to people's strengths. We also coach to their weaknesses. And it really helps us develop the right talent for the right role. And studies have shown that when individuals are utilizing their primary behaviors in a natural state, they're happier, they're more focused, they're more efficient, and they are productive. So, brings me to the end of the presentation, which is year over year, we've reduced our attrition rates roughly by 5 to 6%. So the first year we implemented PI, I think we implemented it halfway through 2012, and we were at about 28% attrition rate. In 2013, we were down to 24%, and 2014, we were down to 18% from attrition. So when you think about using an assessment tool, think about the impact it has on your business. Think about what you're trying to achieve in terms of your business goals. And there's a million tools out there, as we saw earlier today. So it's really figuring out what is your why? What are you trying to accomplish? Why do you need a tool? Why would the organization benefit from a tool? And then finding the tool that works for you. So, thank you. Do I want to go through my... I'm good.
That was great.
Thank you.
Yeah, That was terrific. Thank you, Carla.
Thank you.
And I hope you all have your questions on your Twitter, what is it?
Hashtag.
Okay. Darren was telling me that I should remind you guys how to tweet, and he says, you understand hashtag, right? And I said, well, you mean you don't say number? But so I'm still in that generation. Anyway, Arturo Pagan is a deputy director and the chief HR strategic partner at the United Nations Population Fund. He has a wealth of information to share. Thank you. You're on.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's nice to share my breakfast of time with a bunch of like-minded people who actually understand what I'm talking about, so it's a pleasure to be here. I work at the UN Population Fund, and we are the one agency that deals with reproductive health within the UN system. So just to share a little bit about UNFPA, we are in about 150 countries. We are roughly about 2,500 staff members altogether. We are headquartered here in New York, and here we have about 200 people working at headquarters. So one of our challenges with our staffing is how do we ensure that we hire the right people? How do we ensure that our teams are functioning effectively to actually carry out our mandate? And what can we do to help staff develop when there aren't that many career sort of progression opportunities for them within our agency? We're quite small compared to the larger agencies that you all know, like UNICEF. So we do have limited career mobility. So that presents a lot of challenges for us. So we've used assessments in our learning and development programs, particularly looking at how do we improve team communication and interaction? How do we enhance self-awareness? Carla made a good point, which is you want to have the people that are using their sort of positive and great skills and are happy at work. And so what we need to do is also try to identify and help people identify what are some of those things that motivates them in the workplace. How can we harness those skills and those preferences to have a fantastic, work environment? We also look at career development. Again, within our confined context, we have to pay a lot of attention to that. As well as leadership and succession planning. One of the challenges we have as a small agency based in so many countries around the world is it's hard to find people who will want to serve in your very difficult duty stations like Afghanistan, like Yemen at the moment. So we have to really try to find people with the right skills base because it's not an easy environment to throw someone into. So we are doing a lot at UNFPA to try to use assessments ahead of time to try to assess whether they will be the right fit for that context. And they will be successful in not only dealing with the team that they have, but also some of the external circumstances that they find themselves in. Not an easy task at all. So in terms of the assessments that we use Belbin team roles. How many of you, just by a quick show of hands, are familiar with the Belbin team role theory instrument? 1? Okay. 2? Good. So Belbin is a great tool. Pretty much it goes through what are the 9 team roles that are required for you to have an effective team. We use this instrument a lot in terms of looking at change processes. Whenever we have a big change process happening and we are shifting the structure of an office, we will go in with the Belbin exercise to try to get the people to understand what is their preferred team role within the team, and how does the manager make effective use of that information. But also to look at if you have like 5 of the team roles and some of them are missing, then you can look for those characteristics in the people that you're hiring. So that really helps you try to really structure a good team together. We also use the Neathling Brain Instrument, NBI, which looks at brain preferences based on whole brain theory. The Myers-Briggs, as well as the Occupational Personality Questionnaire, OPQ, done by SHL. And some others which include verbal, logical, and numerical reasoning. So improving team interaction. One story that I'll share with you is I was called by our head of office in Honduras. He said, you know, I've just come into the office as a first-time representative is the person that leads our country office in the office. And he said, I've inherited a very dysfunctional team. I'm only here for 4 years, so I want to maximize what I can accomplish with this team, but I'm having a lot of difficulty. Can you come and help me? So there, what I did was, luckily, Belbin is available in Spanish and in French, which are the two languages that we operate in aside from English. So we were able to have the team identify what were some of the things that were holding them back. I had them do the Belbin exercise, and one of the great things about that instrument is that it really helps you have a common vocabulary with which to address some of these conflicts. So, you know, for instance, we had one staff member in the office that was perceived as being the most difficult staff member to work with. We had developed a little, based on the Belbin profiles, you know, your first 3 sort of strong profiles within your Belbin assessment, and we had developed nicknames for each one of them. So this person's nickname came out being Steamroller. So of course, you know, she came up to me and she's like, I'm really disappointed that, you know, my Belbin assessment said that I'm a steamroller. And I explored that with her a little bit in a coaching conversation, and I said, well, let's think about this a little bit. You know, what difficulty do you perceive from your end having with the staff that you interact with? And so she expressed the fact that she was frustrated, that nobody listened to her, that, you know, she sort of met with brick walls, and so we explored a little bit about her approach. And what was interesting is, after the second day, she came back to me and she said, you know, this is absolutely the most useful thing I've had because nobody's ever told that to me, that I was being very forceful upon them. And, you know, it showed the rest of the office, you know, level of humility in a person where they didn't expect it. So the way that we continued to use that language, everybody made fun of everybody's profile, which is fantastic. But then we actually used it to think about, okay, how can we look at that as now an opportunity? So we did a SWOT analysis using some of the feedback that had come from the Belbin. We looked at what were some of the difficulties that the program team and the operations team were encountering, and we were able to have them really identify what were some of the difficulties that was causing a lot of clash in the office, and how to go past that and actually develop a good working plan. So, you know, I had to follow up with the office probably for about a 6-month period of time after, just to make sure that they were indeed implementing their plans. But everything worked out quite well. The office is now one of our good functioning offices in the region, and the difficult person actually won an award by the government the following year. So it was fantastic to see that I had, you know, with the use of the Belbin instrument, actually, you know, accomplished a little bit of change. We also use it a lot to, in this case, it was a good case of identifying what were some of the conflicts in the teams. Obviously, if you're coming in with a preference of having the big picture, the ideas, you know, seeing where you want to go, you may not necessarily be strong in implementing or wanting to follow rules and procedures. And other people want to follow rules and procedures more strictly. So obviously there you can identify what some of those potential conflicts may be. And how do you use this fun vocabulary and these tools to actually try to counterbalance that? In our orientation programs now, we have also started to use the Neathling Brain Instrument, the MBI. And it's been a fantastic tool for many reasons as well. We are able to get people to know each other very quickly because there are a few activities that we do around the NBI profiles before we actually introduce the instrument and the results for the people that have gone through it. And then we allow them to break into roles based on which quadrant of the brain they prefer to function in, and try to explore with the other people what are some of the similarities that they have in terms of how they're perceived by others, how they perceive themselves, and what are their preferences. And that has been a great way not only for people to introduce themselves and each other, but also to look at self-awareness and how that person is able to adapt to the other people in the team. In a very multicultural environment that we work in, this is probably one of the most critical things that you can do to fit in within the workplace, and also one of the most challenging. So, you know, this actually really has helped us quite a lot deal with introducing new people into a team that already exists, but as well as building that sort of team environment and learning about the needs of others. And one of the greatest comments I got was that it's like a magic tool. It creates easily accessible way to understand the cognitive diversity that exists within the teams that we work with and the teams that we lead. So it's a powerful statement about what we do. The other use that we have for these tools is just to create self-awareness. So what do you as an individual bring to your team? What are your preferences? What motivates you? And how do we really sort of bank on that motivation? What do you need to be careful with? So, most of these instruments do have an element of you're displaying these wonderful, aspects of your preferences, but you also have to be wary that there are some negative traits that you can also be displaying which can limit the ability for you to be effective within the teams. So it's very good to also use these instruments in terms of coaching conversations that we have with various staff members as needed. Interestingly, because we have shortages in our succession plans going forward, we decided that we needed to have a better way to actually ramp up our bench strength. So how do we identify people that can eventually move up to these leadership positions in our country offices? So we decided to launch a leadership pool process whereby we partnered with an assessment provider. Our assessment provider is ODRL based in the UK. And we developed an assessment center which looks at what are the competencies required for our country representatives, our deputy representatives, and our operation managers to be effective. And so with the assessment center, it's a pretty nice blended approach. They use psychometrics, so this is where we go into the use of the OPQ, the reasoning, numerical, and logical ability tests. We also have a 360 feedback, and there's behavioral interviews as part of the process, but then they also are given a very tough country context scenario in which they have role plays. And each of the role plays focuses on looking at, how they behave in certain circumstances, but also how they demonstrate the competency in those areas. And as part of that, obviously, none of these instruments are used, solo. Like one of the feedbacks that we've gotten is, for people that come from countries that are not used to testing, for instance, they have difficult time buying the results that they get from an OPQ. What are you telling me about my personality that I don't already know? And so we've had to be careful to work with the assessment provider when the reporting is done to have the feedback that comes from these assessment tools actually blend into the assessment overall and the results that they see, but not to make it the primary point. So I can give you, for instance, one report we got, which we had to run away from, really, said the person who gave it, you scored amongst the 1% in terms of numerical reasoning, so, your numerical reasoning skills are pathetic. And it's like, oh my God, we cannot, share this report with a staff member as is, because the staff member, we will totally, disconnect them from the workplace. So we have to also educate the assessment center providers that the use of these tools are meant to actually complement the overall assessment process and not just a standalone, feedback event in general. We also use it in leadership development. We have a leadership development program which uses the MBTI and the MBI. The professor that we work with at Cranfield University is sort of like a soothsayer. He's fantastic. He'll take all of your assessments, he'll draw out a map, and he'll come up with a very good indication of who you are as a person and what that means for you in the job that you do. So one example, he told one of the people that went through it, you're a great person, you have a lot of energy, but you're in the wrong job. And that's great because the person said, you're right. And this is probably why I've been miserable for so many years. And she's like, I need an environment where I can thrive, where I can use my energy constructively. And so we were able to offer her that opportunity. Now, it took a change of office, a change of lifestyle, and everything for her. So it took about 3 months for her to feel comfortable in the new role. But she was able to adapt now after 2 months that I've been coaching her, she's been able to adapt very quickly, and now she's using all of that passion and that energy. So, we were able to take a very frustrated staff member and now transform her into one that really is, producing a lot of wonderful things and leading in the world of reduction of HIV, AIDS, and dealing with sex workers. And I guess overall, what are some of the positive and negative feedbacks we have received the use of the instruments? The instruments are very popular, particularly when you take the time to explain them carefully. So yes, you do need people that are certified and are able to actually sort of translate all of that theory into something practical for the person. You know, what does it mean for me? What does it mean if I'm the supervisor leading a team? What do I do with this feedback? How can I use it constructively? You know, how can I use it to strengthen the work that we do and productivity? The perception that it is more objective than subjective, you know, with performance appraisals, everyone always complains that it's only the assessment of my supervisor that is used either for me or against me. So these tools actually help give you more of a 360 look, because some of them do require feedback from all of your team members and your supervisor. So it does provide, you know, grounds upon which you can facilitate a discussion with those people. Most of them are easy to administer and gather reporting, because most of their online profiles are very easy to use once you get, you know, acquainted with them, and most of them are available in many languages, so that also facilitates the use if you are, you know, working in an organization that is structured, you know, across many countries. And it's great for facilitating that communication and dialogue. The challenges that we have as a very sort of multicultural international organization is that there's still a lot of the perception that a lot of these instruments are either culturally biased, linguistically biased in some way or another, or they're biased towards, you know, societies that are used to using assessments and instruments and testing and so on. However, interestingly enough, the head of the UN coordination group, who's the person that now sort of looks over all of our resident coordinators, and in the UN, the resident coordinators are the Ban Ki-moons in each office they work in, has said, you know, I come from Sri Lanka. In my country, a lot of the private sector companies are now using the same assessments, so we can no longer say that they're slanted towards one type of, you know, group or another, you know, because most of the countries that we call southern countries are now also using these assessments in the workplace. So that's nice to see that change. As I mentioned before, there's resistance to using them as standalone tools. They can sometimes complement each other if you use 3 or 4 of them with the same person, or there can be conflicting information. So I think that our role as HR, you know, professionals is to really sort of work with what does this mean for the individual if they do get conflicting feedback, and how do we look at that and compare that. And the other challenge is, yes, they do require people that are certified to use them for the most part to be able to use them to the, you know, full potential that they can offer you. So, you know, at UNFPA, most of our HR colleagues are now certified to use all of these instruments, and we determine, you know, based on the scenarios or the circumstances that they're asked to intervene, how do we best use those assessments and instruments. So it's a lot of work, but it's fantastic, and pretty much I think the only last piece of advice is that nothing can just be a standalone. So, you know, there is an element of coaching and follow-up that is required to make sure that you maximize the feedback that you get from the tools. Thank you.
It's extraordinary that put all that information, Arturo, into such a nice small package. It's an enormous amount of information to think about and take away with. Shavit. So, Shavit Bar-Nahum, Senior VP, Leadership Development Executive at Merrill Lynch Wealth Management.
Thank you. So when I was 22 and didn't know any better, I applied for a job to be a counselor for about 45 kids in an outward bound kind of program. And I don't know what I was thinking. I was way more crunchy granola at the time. And thought this would be a great way to spend the summer because I want to go to grad school. I need to make some changes. So I spent about 2 hours on the phone with somebody talking about me, talking about the role, talking about what the experiences were, and passed the first round and was invited to spend a weekend in Wisconsin with about 6 other candidates. We didn't know at the time how many positions there were. We knew that there were 6 of us that were up for the job, and we didn't know that we were basically in a weekend-long job interview. But it became very clear very quickly because within about the first hour of us sitting together, getting to know each other, checking out the competition, they started throwing scenarios at us. A bus just broke down and you've got to entertain 25 kids in the hot sun, what do you do? Somebody just fell off a cliff and 2 of your counselors went with them and you've got to stay with the rest of the group, what do you do? And it was literally a weekend of scenario after scenario, really feeling like we were under a microscope, very, very intense, to the point that you got paranoid, people started breaking down, massive nervous breakdowns, and I made it. And stayed mostly cool and collected and just allowed the people to break down that needed to break down and kind of came in the end. But I really thought to myself, what happened here? And what was this experience? And how did I pass through this experience? And it was one of the things that led me down the path of where I got to today. So today I am the Leadership Development Executive for Merrill Lynch Wealth Management. And those of you, how many of you are in the financial services industry? Okay, a fair amount. So Bank of America, fairly no name, second largest bank in the US. If you look at our wealth management business, just by assets under management alone, we actually come out to be the 5th largest bank in the United States. So it's a very, very huge responsibility in terms of the amount of money that gets managed, the amount of clients that we touch on a regular basis. And the way I got here was because I was really interested in how to help our leaders be the best leaders that they could be. And the truth is that in my role, and probably in your roles, and probably the leaders that you support and the clients that you serve are always assessing or are being assessed in one way or another. And the question really is there rigor, consistency, validity, reliability to the way in which we use that data and apply that data to making decisions? And ultimately, what I'd like to leave you with, and my colleagues, really talked about specific instruments. What I'd like to do is really talk about some best practices in assessment and then hopefully tie it into some of these incredible practices that they've talked about here today. If you were going to walk away with one idea around assessment best practices, what I would say is that we really need to be, as HR professionals, deliberate and consistent about aligning our assessment to our strategic talent needs. It has to start with what's important to the business, the job that we're asking people to do, and we have to be really thoughtful about how we do that. So you have to start with the talent gaps, the talent needs. You have to ask yourself, do you know what you're looking for? Is it aligned to the business strategies? Are there biases that either I, as the person who is administrating or thinking about the assessments, or the assessors I'm putting in place, are there biases that they bring to the table? Are my clients engaged? So are they engaged in the strategy? Do they know why we're doing this? Do they buy into it, or is this an HR initiative? Because if it's just an HR initiative, the likelihood that people are going to buy into it and make decisions that are long-lasting off of it, it's very rare. Because as soon as something doesn't match with what they say, it's already, well, this was an HR thing, it's not my thing. So it's really, really important for it to be aligned to the business. And ultimately, the benefit is, if you do it right, you're going to find the diamond in the rough, especially when you're doing this for internal assessments, not just for external assessments, and really thinking about hiring or promoting people from within or developing people from within. You're going to reduce biases and make better decisions. And you're going to also really align the individual goals with the goals of the company. And I think back, Arturo, to the example that you gave around this individual, and her goals weren't really being met, and therefore the company's goals weren't being met. But when you have engaged employees, there's no question that the more engaged they are, the better the product and the output and the performance is. So, we, I think, as HR professionals, have an obligation to make the best decisions that'll serve both the business and the individual. And that's an obligation that we bring to the table. So, what I would say is, if you're not prepared to challenge your assumptions and your practices, you may not have the rigor that you need to really, with the assessment practices that you have. So we talked about assessment practices being aligned to talent needs, and here's a couple of key questions that we always ask. First of all, what do you need for the future? So sometimes what you need later 3 years down the line, as you think of the business strategy, isn't what you have today. And so what do you need for the future? What do you have today? And then what are the gaps? And really, there's some rigor that needs to go in place to identify the time, the cost, the resources that it'll take to identify those things, whether it's a job analysis, it's a competency model, the validation of that model. All of that takes time. It takes a tremendous amount of resources, and it certainly costs a lot of money if you don't have the resources to do it in-house. So I'll just give you an example. At Merrill Lynch, we have the role of a complex director. These people usually manage about 150 financial advisors. They manage revenue in the billions. They manage size and scope of location. You know, they could manage a whole state, or they could manage half of New York City, which in some cases is almost the same amount of people. They have a tremendous amount of regulatory risk that they manage on a regular basis. When you manage such a huge amount of money and so many people in a highly regulated environment, we are constantly under scrutiny. Those of you in the financial services industry, and even those of you who are not, know that the microscope is always on us for how we make decisions, who we put in roles. Are we being objective? Are we looking at diversity? Are we really thinking about the risk and reward? So we asked ourselves when we looked at this role of complex director, where we were having a lot of turnover in the role, we were having a lot of people underneath the complex directors being pretty dissatisfied, a lot of financial advisors kind of doing what they wanted to do without a lot of supervision. And we asked, we said we need to look at the way we assess for this role. We need to look at who are the candidates, how do we assess them, and how do we make them more successful. Now, traditionally, anybody who's in wealth management knows that for these roles, it's pretty consistent across the industry. They go through some kind of big assessment center. There are simulations, there's interviews, there's testing, and then the about 20 to 30% that make it through get developed, and eventually some of those folks get a role. And what we said was, what if we actually spend time developing people first and then assessing them, and turning that whole concept on its head, and taking the time to really understand who do we have, how do we build them up, because if they have the ambition and they're interested in the role, how do we make sure that we're really looking for and asking the right questions and assessing them in the right way? And that's what we did. So we've increased by about 15% the amount of people that make it through the process effectively, but also, as a result, we've actually increased the employee engagement of the folks who are underneath them. We've increased the productivity of the folks who are underneath them, because when you make decisions about putting better leaders, or leaders who are more aligned with the kind of leadership you need in roles, it actually has a huge effect on everything else that you have in the process. Let me see what else I want to talk about this. Okay, so we do need to be deliberate, we do need to be consistent, and you really shouldn't do assessment for the sake of assessment. So I know a lot of organizations, and I was in consulting for many years, let's just do a 360, that's going to solve all our problems, they're going to get their results, and then they'll be fixed. And eventually what happens is, you know, that somebody gives them feedback, or they don't. Some organizations have a lot of rigor around it, and they have trained assessors giving feedback, and some organizations don't, and we have that within our organization the same, that we run the gamut. And eventually that 360 finds its way into a drawer, and when you have office cleanup a few years later, it finds itself into the trash, and nothing was really done with it. Does anybody have that experience at all? Okay. All right. So good, because I am speaking to my peeps. And look, what I would say as it relates to personality assessments, 360s, stakeholder reviews, cognitive tests, team tests, decision-making analysis, interview guides, all of those things can be incredibly useful. One, when you've got a trained assessor who really knows. Two, when they're linked to development outputs. So a 360 on its own is nothing if you don't then link it to something real and tangible, and what capabilities can you build, and have follow-up, and make sure that the individual has a responsibility to follow up with their manager and share the results with them and be accountable for them. If they manage a team, we always encourage the individual to reach out to their team, one, to thank them for the feedback, but two, to really share the feedback that they have, and not in a way that's like, thank you for your feedback, and somebody mentioned that I wasn't a good listener, and I just want to let you know that if you guys would just listen to what I would have to say, you would have no problems, right? That doesn't work. So we coach them. There's coaching that happens around that. And we also really try to, almost like the soothsayer, integrate the data together. So one piece of data on its own is interesting. We have a saying in assessment, which is, if you see something once, it's an observation. If you see something twice, it's a hunch. If you see something 3 times, you know it's a pattern. And you know it's consistent. And so for us, if we're going to make any decisions or we're going to coach and guide somebody, we really want data that's consistent. Not one thing that somebody said in passing, not one piece of data that was taken out of context, because we know there's a halo effect. We know, I mean, you guys know all the biases that exist out there in terms of central tendency and the one incident effect, and 20 years ago this guy really made me mad, and there's no way I'm ever going to trust him. We get all of that, and people end up walking around with a brand on their back, and we walk into a talent planning meeting, and somebody has a word that has stuck to an individual, and those words are sticky. And we have an obligation as HR executives to make sure that we can reduce the amount of biases that people walk into. Because words like arrogant, or lack of executive presence, or not strategic, or, this is something that somebody called me the other day. They're like, well, you're very quirky. And I was like, well, I'm not sure what that means, but I don't think it's good for my career if somebody says I'm quirky, and stop saying that about me. It's a good thing I knew. I don't know what else they're saying, but maybe that's the best of all the things that they're saying. So it's really important to make sure you have multiple pieces of data, trained assessors. There's got to be rigor around it. And the other thing I would say is don't let the data go to waste. So if you've got a group that's gone through 360, for God's sake, run a group report. Look to see what are the trends, what are the data, what can you see. Look at it from a demographic perspective, run it by gender, run it by POC, run it by length of service in the organization, and you're going to see so many wonderful things that are going to help you as an HR executive find consultative work that's going to be meaningful and value add to the business. So I'm running short of time, but here's what I would say. You can't be haphazard about assessment. Do your homework like Carla did. She tried it out on herself before she tried it on anybody else. My husband had to get these B12 injections, and I had to have my husband give them to me, and I was like, you know what? I think you should do it on you first to make sure that you know how to do it. Let me watch you do it, and then you can do it to me. But it is really important to make, and if you think about medical school, that's the same way, right? Before you learn to put an IV in somebody else, you got to do it on yourself 3 or 4 times so you get the sensitivity to it. The same thing with assessment. Before you put somebody through a process, do what Carla did. Put yourself through the process. Get the feedback. Know what that experience was like. Because if you don't have a positive experience, you're never really going to be able to be an advocate for it. And I think the other thing that Carla did that was great was she then did it to a smaller group of people and got their feedback. And you can't be haphazard and just choosing because somebody told you to do it. You've got to create trust around the product before you can even put it in place. And then ultimately, you need to check with the appetite of the client. One, somebody's got to pay for it, and I'm pretty sure your budget is pretty much like mine, yes? So someone's got to pay for it, and someone's got to pay for people to get trained, so you got to do your homework around that piece. But ultimately, again, we have an obligation to help people make the best decisions. They're not our decisions to make. The leaders make the decisions about who gets hired and who doesn't. We provide a process to help make recommendations, and it's our job to help provide the data. It's their job to take that data and make decisions so that they can trust us in the future when they've got other decisions to make. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. What a great team right up here. I don't know about you guys, but one of the things that just came out overwhelming for me is how much you care about the whole person, and that the individual is what's critical to you guys, and that's pretty special. So thank you for sharing all that. So we apologize again for our mix-up on that, but we will make Carla's presentation available to you, so you will get that. And the other thing is I'm really glad to see that there's more of me in the audience that really doesn't know how to tweet, maybe, or you really want to stand up and be heard. So we don't have any tweets, so I'm going to throw it out to you guys for questions. So we have 2 mics, and we're ready to go.
You were really
We
clear.
did a great job.
You were so clear.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Diana Tucker with Metro North Railroad. These are all my colleagues. We value 5 o'clock club. And the panel, I want to thank everyone on the panel because I can sense your expertise. And one of the things we struggle at Metro North is ensuring that we identify assessment tools that are free of bias. And I don't know about you, but with my experience, I find that there are some tools out there. We rely on just solely one of them sometimes, and I really appreciate what Shavit said, that it's very important to look at a blend of tools so that you're not just, focusing on one. But, and Carla, my question is, in using the PI, the predictive index, have you come across any, adverse impact in your group that you work with?
Have I come across, I'm sorry?
Any adverse impact on certain job group, discrimination?
In terms of job discrimination?
Individual, like any adverse impact on a certain group, job group, like whether it's
No.
African American, Asian,
No,
Hispanic?
no, not at all, actually. Because what ultimately happens is that their primary behaviors, the primary behaviors are dominance, and I'm sorry you didn't get to see that in my presentation. Dominance, extroversion, patience, and formality. So it really doesn't, those 4 factors are across everybody, so regardless of gender, race, or age. And so we haven't seen that. I think in terms of the impact that we see sometimes where we get stakeholders or hiring managers who may disagree on the criteria required for the same role or the behavior that's required for the same role. And in that instance, we have them both fill out the pro, and we take a combination, a blend of those 2 profiles.
So it almost has the opposite effect. It's taking all the bias out.
It's
and
taking
putting
the
us all
bias
in the same plane. Thanks, that was a great question. Go ahead, yeah.
Hi, my name is Jose Garcia. I'm a people engineer. And my question is for Arturo or Shavit, whoever wants to answer it. So you mentioned, assessing people for roles and project opportunities. At what point in a person's career do you actually introduce them to the assessment? Is it that the manager recommends them? Is it someone that says, like, I'm ready for promotion? Like, when does the assessment get introduced to the person?
In our organization, so we have a call for applications, so people who want to or feel that they're ready to go for higher level positions can actually apply for one of the 3 roles that are leadership roles, or they can be nominated by one of the directors. So it happens either way at UNFPA. Either way, we look at, before accepting you into the assessment center, we look things such as, your performance history. We look at how long you've been with the organization, how long you've been performing the functions that you've been performing, and gather any other type of feedback that we can. So because it is an expensive process for us, I mean, pretty much per candidate, I think we have anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000. We need to do that because we need to have the right person go into some of these complex countries. So it is worth it, but because it's expensive, we also have to limit the amount of people that we can put through.
I'm impressed by your low costs per person. So for us, it's at different levels, and it depends on what the role is. The assessments get more rigorous and more intense as you get higher in the organization. There are tools that we use that don't require a tremendous amount of administration to move from like a PMD to an FA. And then as we move somebody into a complex director role, it becomes a much, much more intensive process where it's really an assessment center with tools and 360s and simulations, and it's a 9-month process, and it's probably $12,000 per person, but it's all in-house. We don't pay an external vendor to do that, and it's just the cost of what it costs us. But we do, the more senior the position, the more rigorous the assessment. So there are probably tools you can use more broadly for a larger population, and then it's going to get more intense and deeply personal the higher you are.
So again, that's a great question. Can I just put it off to you, Carla, because it's so different. I mean, is your cost, I would think, was a lot lower? Could
Yeah,
you
our
share
costs are actually minimal in the sense where we pay, there's an annual licensing fee, and that is dependent on the size of your organization, and it starts at about $5,000 a year. And that offers us the opportunity to have an unlimited number of surveys conducted. So for us, we can assess 2 people, or we can assess 2 million people. It would be the same price. In addition, there are costs for the employees within the organization to get trained and certified in PI, so that they're ultimately able to do the assessments, then the analysis of the assessments. And so there is a cost for that, and it's roughly around $2,100 per person.
Great. Right here.
Hi. My name is Leslie Lorenzana, and I'm an HRS analyst, so I deal with data a lot. So, I really appreciate all that the 3 of you were saying, and of patterns, and finding patterns and combining different data and not letting that data go to waste, because that's also something that we kind of do a lot of. We just kind of gather data and how do you use it, but or finding the time to use it all. But my question anyway is, to Arturo specifically, you said, combining the different tools together, and you said sometimes there would be a conflict. So what are some ways that you might deal with that when you have 2 different assessments where one says, oh, well, you're this type of person, another completely different? I mean, how do you handle that?
Usually in those scenarios, it's all about coaching. So then what I would do in case there is conflict with the instruments is actually sit down with the person and explore, what are those conflicts saying about your profiles in each of the tools? Look at whether there are any, sort of biases to the tool. So I can share with you, going back to the question that also came from the back, when we did Belbin team role theory in China, we have a large office of about, I want to say 50 people there. Half of the office came out having a strong team worker profile. So knowing that already there is a bit of a cultural bias that went into how they responded to the question, not necessarily as individuals, but as what they expected the society of them. So that was quite an interesting bias. Then we decided to do the MBI, because then we wanted to see, okay, let's explore this a little bit deeper and look at your brain preferences. So this is how we will use this information, also knowing if we do go into a country where we know that there may be some, sort of cultural biases that are impacting how the people respond to the questions, then we'll explore that element of it as well. But it is a lot, one-on-one, we do just sit down, we look at the different instruments. We may even go to, different assessments just to get a fuller picture, and then sit down and say, okay, let's explore this together and see what it really means for you.
Hi, Shavit. My question, I'm from a financial service industry as well, and my question is, you said prepare to challenge assumptions and current business practices. My question is, when you implemented these things, these assessments, what changed? And buy-in wise, from a very, obviously a high sales-driven environment, how did you get your operators to buy into this practice?
It's a great question. There's always cultural elements that you have to deal with, and at Merrill, it's a 100-year-old culture that was very entrenched and very ingrained, and the traditional assessment practice was basically seen as like the holy grail. If you were invited to go through it, it was an honor, and you couldn't say no, and we ended up putting people in roles that were not successful, even if they made it through the process. So we really, when we started to think about this, we also thought about the culture, and it came with a change in leadership, and it came with a vision, there were many, many pieces that had to do with initially really talking about best practices with the most senior levels and getting their buy-in, and then really doing a lot of due diligence around conversations. We didn't do focus groups or anything like that. It's been about 4 years since we changed the process. The first year people were pretty skeptical. We had fewer people, and we changed it from you were tapped on the shoulder to you were tapped, but you could also volunteer in. And what we found was that as we combined the people's motivation with the job, it actually changed the whole persona. It just changed the feeling of it. And while it's still very rigorous, and when I mentioned the cost before, that includes all the development. That includes the people we bring in to train them. That includes all the on-the-job guides that they do, all of these things that happen throughout a very long process. The other thing that has really helped us to get buy-in is that it became a combination of not just what the assessors saw in the assessment center, but they have an on-the-job advisor and they have a peer coach, and those people are always assessing them on the job. So it's not just what happened in this simulated environment or what this test said. It was really a combination of very, very many things. And in the end, what we found is that we've just made better choices. So it took a little while to get there. The first 2 years, there was a fair amount of skepticism. Every once in a while, I still hear, oh, well, if you would have done it the old way, you would have never had this problem. And maybe that's true, and maybe it's not. But once we made a commitment to something, we really want to see it out. And we know that it really takes about 5 years of data to be able to show some respectable trends. And so we're asking people to stick with us. And there's a tremendous amount of credibility in the process because of the partnership that my leadership development group has with the business.
Go ahead.
Yes, so Tiro, I'm curious to know, with all the assessments that you conduct, who is selected to provide the assessments, and how is there some requirement or training, skills that you require, and perhaps all of you, that you require of someone to be eligible to be ready to conduct an assessment, to perform it, to give the feedback, et cetera?
Okay. So the tools that we use have all been sort of, for anything that we do, we have to go through procurement processes and actually look at what the needs are, particularly at the moment, and explore the different tools. So we actually do test them amongst ourselves to determine which ones are the ones that are most relevant. But, particularly for the assessment center, which is our most expensive process undergoing right now, when we prepared the first request for proposal, we put in that we wanted the company to propose, knowing our environment that we operate in, what were some of the tools that they feel could be, very productive in our assessment process based on our competency framework, based on the needs that we have in these critical countries. And that's how and then we sat down and we explored the tools that they were proposing, and then we came up with a final sort of selection. For instruments like the MBI, the MBTI, and Belbin, most of us in HR, we're quite small, we're about 27 people. We just expanded 6, so now we have people in each of the regions. But most of the team are certified in the use of these instruments, so if at any time they're called to do an intervention, they actually can decide which tool best meets my needs in this circumstance, and this is how we're going forward. And we have operating licenses with each of these instruments.
So not necessarily OD professionals, but HR generalists.
They're like our HR, what we call them specialists, because they have a very specific role in terms of talent management, learning development, and facilitating, because we all facilitate every once in a while as well. So those are the people that actually can go ahead and administer these instruments. The assessment center is a bit more of a complex process, so we are not certified in OPQ, for instance, and because each of the assessments used as part of the overall assessment center process, we leave that to them as the professionals to actually piece together that feedback and come up with the reports.
So thank you for that answer, because piggybacking on that, going back to the survey at the beginning of our session today, in this audience, a lot of you aren't using assessments. So if we don't have, for people in the audience that don't have the benefit of these big assessment centers to draw from, what advice could you give them in terms of how do I get started? Like, how, there's so many assessments out there. How do I make that choice to pick the first one?
I mean, I would just really go back to what I said, which is you have to start with the business strategy and the business needs or the gaps. What are you trying to solve for? Where are you today? And then what are the gaps? And assessment may or may not be the solution. The other thing I would just say to piggyback on this last question is that I don't believe that every HR professional can administer and deliver feedback and be an assessor or be a coach. I really don't. Some people are better at other things than they are, and I think it's a core competency and a skill set, and I'm not trying to be snobbish about it, but there is, again, an obligation and a responsibility that comes with it, and it's not something you want to leave to chance. So there is certification processes that we go through. There are hurdles that we even put our assessors through. But ultimately, it starts with what are the gaps between where you are today and where you want to go, and then you've got to look at your kind of menu of choices.
So in summary, I think that's a good place to end. It's a real serious decision. Yes. It takes a lot of thought, a lot of research, and attention. It's not you're not just doing something, throwing it in the drawer, but it has significant positive impact and some potential negative. Darren, close it out. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much.
Let's hear it for our panelists. That was fantastic. Thanks, everybody, for coming. Please return your polling devices to the ushers on your way out. Hope you enjoyed the seminar. We look forward to seeing you in June. Go New York Rangers. Thanks again, everybody.